Hi, welcome to Brown Girl Book Lover. I'm Leslie and Murray. Today we have Vauhini Vara, and we're talking about her debut book, The Immortal King Rao. I'm going to give you a quick bio. Vauhini Vara is the O. Henry Award winner author of the novel The Immortal King Rao, which debuted in 2022. She has worked as an editor at The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, and The Atlantic, as a journalist for those publications and others, including the Wall Street Journal, where she began her career. Her fiction has appeared in McSweeney, Harper's, The New Republic, Business Week, Fortune, and elsewhere. She's a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. Vauhini, welcome to Brown Girl Book Lover.
Thank you for having me, Leslie Ann.
Tell us about your book.
So the story of the book, it starts with a young woman named Athena. She is in prison and she has been accused of somehow being involved in the murder of her father. And her father is named King Rao. He's the titular character of this book. So Athena's in prison and she's telling the story of her father and of herself in an effort to sort of like free herself and also sort of like change the circumstances of the world in which she's living. Her father grew up on a small coconut grove in the south of India in a Dalit family, and grew up in a family whose circumstances were changing, a sort of like historically poor family that was sort of had recently come into, some landowning wealth. And then he's a precocious kid. His family has these new resources. He, ends up getting educated. He moves to the US in the 70s to pursue graduate school in computer programming, becomes a programmer, starts a tech company with a young woman who later becomes his wife, named Margie. And this company grows and grows and grows and eventually becomes not just the biggest company in the world, but like this sort of world dominating company that eventually, along with some other companies, takes over the government of the world. So like national governments go away and this company sort of takes over. Athena is born in the aftermath of all that. Her dad, King Rao, has had a fall from grace. And after that, Athena has come into this world. And so she's like both trying to make sense of everything that's happened and figure out like what the right path for her is in this world.
What are two takeaways you would like readers to know about your book?
I hesitate in answering that question because I am very much of the mind that like, I spent 13 years on this book and it's very dear to me. And I feel like I know it very well. I have an intimate relationship with it. And then I put it into the world. And I do feel very strongly that like people are going to receive something. Every reader is going to receive something different from it. Like, I think the book can be read as just like like an adventure story about this 17, 18-year-old young woman, Athena, moving through the world, right? Like a sort of dystopian adventure story. I think it can be read as a story about the rise of global capitalism, like an ideas book. I think it can be read as like a father-daughter, like an intimate father-daughter story, right? About what happens when one generation breaks from the previous generation and like, while also maintaining some kind of connection. And so like, I think there are like a lot of things that I was trying to do in the book. And I don't mind if, one reader has a wildly different experience from another. And I also like don't have any firm ideas about what I think a reader should get from it.
Spoken like a true journalist. What are you currently reading?
The book that I just finished, which I'd read, like I'd sort of started reading it years ago and then just returned to and like read more carefully this time, is this book by an Indian American at this point. She lives in the US, journalist and scholar named Yashika Dutt, Dutt. And the book is called Coming Out as Dalit. And just in case some listeners, some viewers of the show aren't familiar with that term, I've mentioned it a couple of times, but But Dalit is the name for people who are oppressed by the caste hierarchy, the caste system in India. So they're considered outside by people who believe in this system. They're considered outside of the caste system. The term untouchable might be familiar to people. That's the term that's sort of historically been used in a derogatory way to describe this community. And that's the community that I come from on my dad's side of the family. And so that's introduced like this interesting dynamic where people who have like been beneficiaries of that upward mobility, beneficiaries is probably the wrong word, but people who have benefited from the fact that like certain barriers have been lowered somewhat, have now had to grapple with like whether to be open about the fact that they are Dalit, right? So this journalist wrote this great memoir slash kind of social history of casteism and caste in India. And it came out in India. It hasn't been published in the US, but you can definitely order it online. It'll come to your house in the US. And I recommend it. It's cool because she sort of like goes back and forth between her own personal story of sort of like deciding to come out as Dalit and the sort of like history of caste in India, and like gives a sort of like history lesson to those who might not be familiar with caste. So it's very accessible too.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for talking about your book. I'll continue to follow you, and I wish you more and more success, and I appreciate you.
Oh, same to you. I really appreciate you and the work you're doing. Thanks for having me.